You exist because someone, somewhere, decided to stop running. For 200,000 years, your ancestors lived like ghosts. They moved with the herds. They followed the rains. They left no monuments, no cities, no names carved into stone. And then, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, everything changed. A species that had spent its entire existence as wanderers suddenly stopped, planted seeds, built walls, and invented a word that had never existed before. Home we on tour. This is not simply a story about farming. This is the story of the most radical transformation in the history of life on Earth. The moment when humanity stopped adapting to the world and started forcing the world to adapt to us. Between 12,000 and 4,000 years ago, human beings invented almost everything that defines your life today. Agriculture, cities, writing, laws, laws, taxes, kings, armies. Slavery died. Religion has organized power. The very concept of owning land, of drawing a line in the dirt and saying this is mine and that is yours. Every border on every map, every deed to every house, every war fought over territory traces its origin to this window of time. And the cost was staggering. What would you sacrifice for civilization? Would you trade your freedom for a full stomach? Would you accept a shorter life, a broken back, rotting teeth, and endless labor in exchange for the promise that your children might survive the winter? Your ancestors made that trade, and you are living with the consequences. Let us begin where everything ended and everything started. The Ice Age is dying. For 100,000 years, glaciers 2 miles thick have covered the northern world. Sea levels sit 400 feet lower than today. The English Channel is a grassy plain where mammoths graze. The Mediterranean is a series of disconnected lakes. Australia and New Guinea form a single vast continent. And you can walk from Siberia to Alaska without getting your feet wet. But the ice is retreating. The great melt has begun. Around 12,000 years ago, temperatures surge. The glaciers pull back like a tide receding from the shore. Forests march northward across landscapes that had been frozen tundra for longer than modern humans had existed. And the megafauna, the giant creatures that had defined the Ice Age world, begin to vanish. Mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, cave bears, creatures that had fed and clothed and terrified human beings for countless generations, disappear within a few thousand years. Did climate change kill them? Did human hunters drive them to extinction? The answer is almost certainly both. A perfect storm of warming temperatures and increasingly sophisticated human predation. But whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic for the hunters who depended on them. The old ways were dying, and something new would have to take their place. Picture the world your ancestors inhabited. Not the romantic fantasy of noble savages living in harmony with nature, but the reality. Small bands of perhaps 20 to 50 people, constantly moving, constantly searching for food. Life expectancy around 30 years. Infant mortality devastating. One bad winter, one failed hunt, one outbreak of disease could erase an entire community from existence. But there were compensations. Hunter-gatherers worked far fewer hours than farmers would. Their diet was varied and nutritious. They suffered from fewer infectious diseases because they lived in small, mobile groups that could not sustain epidemics. They had no kings, no slaves, no inherited wealth. Decisions were made collectively. Resources were shared. Was this freedom? Or was it simply survival at its most precarious? The answer depends on what you value more. Security or liberty? Abundance or equality? The question is not academic. It is the central tension of human existence. And it was decided, irrevocably, in a crescent of fertile land between two rivers. The Fertile Crescent. This arc of green stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern Iraq, Syria, and down into Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. contained something found almost nowhere else on Earth. Wild wheat, wild barley, wild lentils and peas. Sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle that could be domesticated. Every major founder crop and founder animal of Western civilization grew naturally in this one region. This was not an accident. This was geography as destiny. Around 9600 BCE, in the hills of what is now southeastern Turkey, something unprecedented happened. At a place called Gobekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers who had not yet domesticated a single crop or animal began constructing massive stone monuments. One bad harvest, and thousands starved. The stakes had never been higher, and the rewards had never been greater. By 6000 BCE, farming had spread across the Fertile Crescent and into Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Nile Valley. Each generation pushed the frontier a little further. Each generation transformed a little more wilderness into fields. And each generation grew more numerous than the last. This was the first population explosion in human history, where hunter-gatherers had numbered perhaps 5 to 10 million worldwide. Farming communities grew exponentially. By 3000 BCE, the human population had reached perhaps 50 million. By the time the first cities arose, humanity had become a force of nature, reshaping entire ecosystems to serve its needs. And then came the cities. Uruk. Say the name slowly. Let it sit in your mouth. This city on the banks of the Euphrates River, in what is now southern Iraq, was the first true city in human history. By 3000 BCE, it held somewhere between 40,000 and 80,000 people. Nothing like it had ever existed. Try to imagine what that meant to people who had never seen more than a few hundred faces in their lives. The noise, the crowds, the overwhelming, suffocating, exhilarating density of human life pressed together behind high walls. Temples rising on artificial mountains. Markets selling goods from 1,000 miles away. Scribes scratching symbols into wet clay that would preserve records for 5,000 years. Uruk invented the city, and in doing so, it invented almost everything else. Writing. The earliest writing was not poetry or philosophy. It was accounting. Clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped marks, recording how many bushels of barley the temple received, how many sheep were sacrificed to the goddess Inanna, how many workers were owed their daily bread ration. The technology that would eventually produce Homer and Shakespeare and the scientific literature of the modern world began as a tool for bureaucrats to track inventory. Laws. When you crowd tens of thousands of strangers together in a confined space, you need rules. Formal, written, and enforceable rules. The earliest law codes attempted to regulate everything from assault to adultery to the proper payment for medical procedures. For the first time, justice was not personal. It was administered by the state. Specialization. In a hunter-gatherer band, everyone does a little of everything. In a city, you become one thing. A potter, a weaver, a priest, a soldier, a scribe. Your identity narrows to your function. You are no longer a complete human being. You are a component in a vast machine. Hierarchy. And at the top of that machine sat the king. The earliest leaders were probably priests. The temples of Mesopotamia were not just religious centers. They were economic engines. Vast estates that owned land, commanded labor, and controlled the distribution of resources. The priest who spoke for the god became the man who controlled the surplus. And the man who controlled the surplus controlled everything. But priests could not fight. And as cities grew wealthy, they attracted predators. Raiders from the hills. Rival cities competing for water and trade routes. The priest needed a war leader. And the war leader, once he had proven himself, was not inclined to give power back. Kingship. The concept seems natural to us now, but it was a radical invention. One man, elevated above all others. One man whose word was law. One man who claimed to rule by divine right, chosen by the gods to command the labor and the loyalty and the very lives of his subjects. The king was not a father protecting his family. The king was not a chief, earning his status through generosity and wisdom. The king was an absolute ruler commanding an apparatus of coercion. Soldiers, tax collectors, scribes who recorded every transaction and every debt, prisons for those who defied the royal will. This was the price of civilization. To live in a city, to enjoy its protections and its opportunities, you surrendered your autonomy. You became a subject. How did people accept this? How did they submit to a system so obviously designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many? Through religion. The kings of Mesopotamia were not simply political leaders. They were intermediaries between humans and gods. The ziggurats, those stepped pyramids that dominated every Mesopotamian city, were cosmic mountains where heaven and earth met. The king climbed to the summit to commune with divine powers. The king ensured that the rivers flooded at the proper time, that the crops grew, that the city remained safe from enemies human and supernatural. To question the king was to question the cosmic order itself. To rebel against the king was to invite divine punishment. The gods had ordained the hierarchy. Who were mere mortals to overturn it? This is the genius and the horror of early civilization. It created systems of meaning that made exploitation feel like the natural order of the universe. The farmer who surrendered half his harvest to the temple was not being robbed. He was fulfilling his sacred duty. The laborer who spent his life hauling bricks for the king's palace was not a slave. He was serving the divine plan. And if you did not serve, if you refused to pay, refused to work, refused to bow, the state had an answer for that too. The earliest written records include references to debt, slavery. If you could not pay what you owed, you could be seized, along with your family, and forced to work until the debt was cleared. Which might be never, which might be generations. Slavery. The institution that would define human civilization for the next 5,000 years. The institution that built the pyramids of Egypt and the plantations of the American South. The institution that treated human beings as property, as tools, as livestock. Slavery existed before cities. War captives were likely enslaved in the earliest agricultural communities. But cities industrialized slavery. They created markets where human beings were bought and sold. They created legal categories that defined certain people as permanently, inherently inferior. They created an economy that depended on forced labor to function. When you walk through a museum and admire the golden artifacts of ancient Sumer, the exquisite jewelry and carved ivory and lapis lazuli, remember that someone made those objects. Someone whose name was never recorded. Someone who may have been worked to death in a palace workshop, far from home, under the absolute control of an owner who viewed them as nothing more than a talking tool. This is civilization. Glory and horror inseparable. Achievement built on suffering. Progress purchased with blood. By 2500 BCE, the pattern had spread across the ancient world. In Egypt, the Nile Valley had been unified under a single divine king. The pharaoh who was not merely the representative of the gods, but a god himself. The pyramids at Giza were already ancient, monuments to a power so absolute that it could command millions of labor hours to build tombs for a single man. In the Indus Valley, the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had grown to rival Uruk. With sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, and a writing system that remains undeciphered to this day. We do not even know what language they spoke. We do not know the names of their kings, if they had kings. A civilization that may have held 5 million people, and they left us only ruins and silence. In China, the Longshan culture was building walled towns and practicing a religion centered on ancestor worship and divination, laying the foundations for the dynasties that would emerge in the following millennium. And everywhere, the same pattern. Agriculture leading to surplus. Surplus leading to population growth. Population growth leading to cities. Cities leading to hierarchy. Hierarchy leading to kingship. Kingship leading to armies. Armies leading to conquest. Conquest leading to empire. This is not a story of inevitable progress. This is a story of contingent choices, each one closing off alternatives, each one deepening the commitment to a particular path. At every stage, other options existed. Hunter-gatherer societies continued to thrive in environments unsuited to agriculture. Pastoral nomads developed cultures based on mobility and herding, rather than settlement and farming. Some communities experimented with egalitarian structures that distributed power more broadly. But the agricultural civilizations had advantages that could not be matched. Numbers, organization, technology, the ability to generate surpluses that could support specialized warriors, specialized priests, specialized administrators. When agricultural civilizations encountered alternatives, they tended to absorb them or destroy them. Not because agriculture was better, but because agriculture was more powerful. Are you comfortable? As you watch this, as you sit in a climate-controlled room surrounded by the products of 5,000 years of accumulated technology, do you feel grateful for the choices your ancestors made? Or do you feel trapped? The hunter-gatherer who roamed the savannah 40,000 years ago shared 99% of your DNA. Her brain was as large as yours. Her capacity for language, for art, for abstract thought was identical to yours. In a different world, with different circumstances, you could have been her. Living in a small band, moving with the seasons, knowing every person you would ever meet. Working perhaps 4 hours a day to secure your subsistence, spending the rest of your time in leisure, in socializing, in the kind of face-to-face community that modern humans spend billions of dollars trying to recreate through social media. You gave that up. Or rather, your ancestors gave it up on your behalf, and you never had the option to choose differently. The world you inherited was already shaped by decisions made 10,000 years ago. The cities where most humans now live. The states that claim sovereignty over every inch of land on Earth. The economic systems that require constant growth to function. The social hierarchies that sort people into categories of more and less valuable. The religions that emerged to justify those hierarchies. The technologies that emerged from those religions and economies and states. All of it traces back to this window, 12,000 to 4,000 years ago. The birth of civilization. And civilization, once born, could not be unborn. The path led only forward, through empires and collapses, through dark ages and renaissances, through plagues and discoveries, through revolutions and wars, to this moment. To you watching a screen, contemplating the choices of people so distant in time that their world is barely recognizable. Yet, here is the uncomfortable truth. The challenges they faced are the challenges you face. How do you balance individual freedom against collective security? How do you distribute resources fairly when some will always want more? How do you maintain social cohesion when population grows too large for everyone to know each other? How do you govern strangers? Your ancestors invented answers to these questions. Those answers shaped everything that followed. And those answers are still with you, embedded in your institutions, your assumptions, your very sense of what is normal and natural. The pyramids still stand. The Code of Hammurabi still echoes in modern law. The cities your ancestors built are still inhabited, their street plans still visible beneath modern sprawl. The gods they worshipped have different names now, but the temples still rise toward heaven, and the priests still speak for powers greater than any individual. Does this feel like ancient history? Or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? The first farmers could not have imagined what their choices would create. They could not have foreseen cities of millions, empires spanning continents, technologies that would reshape the climate of the entire planet. They were simply trying to survive, simply trying to feed their children through another winter, simply responding to pressures they did not fully understand with solutions that seemed in the moment like the only options available. And now you stand at another threshold. The choices you make, the systems you accept or challenge, the paths you pursue or abandon, will shape the world your descendants inherit. They will look back at this moment the way you look back at the birth of civilization. They will wonder why you made the choices you made. They will live with the consequences you set in motion. What will you leave them? I'm Christopher, and I believe that history is not a collection of dusty facts about dead people. History is the story of how we became who we are. It is the accumulated weight of every choice, every triumph, every tragedy that brought us to this moment. Understanding history does not mean memorizing dates and names. It means recognizing yourself in people who lived 10,000 years ago, because you share their hopes and their fears and their fundamental humanity. The first farmers were not primitive. They were brilliant improvisers, adapting to a changing world with the tools available to them. The first kings were not simply tyrants. They were innovators, creating new forms of organization that allowed human beings to accomplish things no individual could achieve alone. The first slaves were not abstractions. They were people with names and families and dreams, people whose suffering underwrote the glories we celebrate. If we remember them, all of them, perhaps we can make better choices. Perhaps we can build on what they achieved without repeating their mistakes. Perhaps we can create civilizations that deserve the name. Or perhaps we are just as trapped as they were, responding to pressures we do not fully understand, making choices that will shape millennia, hoping that our descendants will forgive us. The seeds are in the ground. The oils are going out. The future is being written, and you are holding the stylus. What will you choose?